I'm making this video as a record to myself and to anyone it concerns in recognition of a worthy lifelong pursuit of mine and in light of recent developments in that life. In the year of 2016, I'm finally ready to enter the marketplace of ideas and expose the content I've had to keep private for 15 years, out of both fear and arrogance, which, when addressing the sanctity of intellectual property, I would bet many would see as the same thing. I am an aspiring game designer, which is to say that I play video games and in my arrogance and/or ignorance believe that I, with my talents and resourcefulness, can do a better job in making content than what is readily available at the time of this video's publication. And I say that in full recognition of the stigma that comes with claiming as such. One not only of proclaiming self-ingratiating delusions of grandeur, but also the one that precedes it, that I play video games. The social image this projects to the vast majority of people, specifically non-gamers, including my and probably your parents, is the underlying root of many of my ambitions, which is to simply do away with it. Now, what happens when I make such a statement? For gamers, it is usually memory-provoking. For others, it brings up their opinion of someone who plays too many games, and is more often than not done with negative connotation. I've made this video to agree with them, and I'm posting it as a solid reminder to myself and to anyone it concerns of my commitment in honor, so to speak, of the new year, as to force myself under pain of ridicule to follow through. And so I urge anyone who thinks by the end of this video that video games are inadequate as a creative medium and do not promote a healthy lifestyle as is, then please leave a dislike. To begin, the gaming industry and gaming as a creative media are not compatible. The gaming industry's goal is, and has always been, to make money, just like anything else. That is to say that they, and by they I mean producers, the people who financially back a game's development, which in this age costs millions to produce, effectively putting them on par with movies and TV, don't want to back anything that seems risky and has the chance of falling through. The safest way, then, for a worthwhile safe investment to be made is to back a model with extensive history of success. This is typically your first-person shooter, along with your modern RPG, set in a modern era for realism, although this is increasingly being moved to postmodern settings, as modern settings have been thoroughly spent by shallow content. And while all of this is very well known and documented, it does little to prove why the industry is not conducive to creativity. After all, games are once engines of creative content. In the past, the only way for your game to sell was to make more attractive games with better feel and controls. During that time, there was no cookie-cutter model for game quality that you could just dump money into to improve graphics continuously and rely on an IP's weight and multiplayer to bring in consumers. In other words, it was when it paid to be creative and to have unique designs that were limited only by technology and memory and processor capacity. It was, in other words, when producers and designers could work together in tandem, producing creative harmony. It is in this instance for which the most lucrative method for a given industry is also the most open-minded and hence the pinnacle of unparalleled innovation, which can be thought of in any context as the classical period of that industry, which has now passed for gaming. There is no longer a balance between these forces for which the market today is evident of. They are at odds, and the producers have the power because creativity is no longer required to make money. They have discovered that they have an indefinite venue that they can appeal to with lackluster content, a venue that is intrinsic to gaming's origins. I'm talking, of course, about children and adolescents. It's a venue that always refreshes every year and doesn't know or particularly care for good content when they see it. They are the most shallow gamer, often referred to as casuals. Of course, this doesn't always apply to every one of them, since eventually some casuals become entrenched in the gaming culture and become hardcores, at which point they typically stop frequenting bad content, if not entirely boycotting it. But this is inconsequential to producers because the venue of preteens always refreshes with the same level of ignorance and tolerance, and some of the casuals who have grown tired of it are not willing to try other games because of the social stigma that I mentioned earlier, or because they're under the impression that they have already played the best the market has to offer, which, by the way, is the impression you would get if you only paid attention to what is advertised and what is being played by other casuals, and thus simply drop off gaming as a whole. And who can blame them? For both of these instances, the hardcore suffer. Their needs are not catered to because they don't command as much attention as the inexhaustible wave of casuals, and so they are often forced to buy bad content because of having to wait for creative content, which is becoming less and less frequent. Now, I'm well aware of the demographics of modern gaming and that the average age of a gamer is over 30, but unfortunately that does little to show what kind of games are being played, and hence perpetuating lackluster content, that being casual or pro. And to answer this, the next question I ask is what makes a game casual, and what are some casual games? But to answer that question deserves its own video and is not my objective for this post, and must come later. And I apologize for using terms like hardcore and casual, but they are the easiest for me to use for the purposes of showing the decline in gaming creativity. However, the creative side of the gaming industry has not declined at all despite the lower turnout of creative games. The designers have never had a problem with producing content. They have simply been feeling the effects of having to deal with technological limitations to their ideas, coupled with budget restraints and now copyright infringements, which essentially means they are on a rather restrictive time limit for producing original content before the ideas are used elsewhere as the new technology stipulates their innovation. This fact alone makes the claim I made earlier in the video far more plausible with the creativity of designers, as stunted as it is and was. The designers themselves, though, have never been lacking in creativity. Your favorite games of the past could have most likely been produced many years earlier if technology had allowed them to. Here's the truth about game designers and their content. Like any other person, the content is conceived in its purest form, but must be filtered through that person's ability to portray it to others. The people who do this best are artists, and that's whether or not the person is a writer, a musician, a graphic designer, etc. And even the best artist is not always able, really not ever able, to depict their ideas in their purest form, and so what he or she creates is essentially a shade of that idea. The level of opacity of that shade, though, directly correlates with the amount of time they have to develop it in the first place, which again is heavily rushed by the industry standards. Next, a person has to be willing to make compromises with other artists to produce content faster, and the purity of the original idea is diluted further. Additionally, the designer must now conform, often without even being asked, due to the fact that the content he or she made belongs to the company as per a contract, to the producer's whims, which is usually to appeal to a venue or to keep things PC and so forth. And once again the idea is diluted, but is now ready to be distributed, and the buyer is ready to consume whatever intellectual juices are left, if any, and those that are left can now be enjoyed to their fullest, right? No, unfortunately, there is one last filter still remaining before the artist's expendable labor is digested. That is the filter of the viewer, the consumer, which, as stated before, is more often than not a casual, and as you may imagine, not everything gets noticed by these individuals, and so the chances of the game being judged with all of its merits accounted for aren't so great. Most of us can name a game that went under the radar for this reason because it didn't get the proper post-production it required, or because its merits were lost on its audience. And so it turns out that, with things as they are, even the artist must conform to the bad content to some degree if they want to have a higher chance of being noticed. And after all this in mind, what is left to hope for as a developer or a hardcore who has given up on the gaming industry's progressive feedback to bad content? Well, consider this. Suppose a monopoly on a quality of game that was so high that it couldn't be replicated by a model of success, that couldn't be emulated by simple investments of money into graphics and so forth. The market would be forced to compete by raising the own quality of its games. This will effectively raise the bar of intellectual integrity for both the designers and, more importantly, the audience by exposing them to better and better content, restoring the balance between the creative engine and economic engine. So theoretically it can be done, but now how would this be done? What level of quality exactly? You are entitled to ask. Well, by upping the quality of games to the point where non-gamers, even non-gamers of just a particular genre of game, can participate because the sophistication of game design now appeals to them, whereas they would have otherwise been turned away by the standards of the industry. Put yet another way, in the long run, as the cycle continues, when games are viewed in the same light as reading a book or painting a picture, the aforementioned stigma that has laid so heavily a burden on the gaming community will be gone, and the hardcores who were once fed up with the game available at the time and have since abandoned them, essentially, come back from retirement. At this point, if an initial franchise has swayed enough people, as they have in the past, and is successful in converting enough casuals, the hardcores will finally outnumber the casuals. At this point, and not before, is when we'll see a permanent shift in the market towards creativity over frugal expedience. That is my purpose. To make gaming the #1 recreational activity of the first world, worthy to those with the intelligence to appreciate it. And unlike other gaming critics on this website who like to boast their understanding of game design and how a game performs in the face of the competition of its contemporaries and its predecessors, and how they generally are not pleased with this and that, remember, I'm actually doing something about it, whether I have the fan base or not. Now, how to acquire the budget for such a high quality game if, as already explained, is not lacking due to creative deficiency? Well, suppose there was content that had already had thousands of hours of pre-production put into it cost-free. Now add to that a small or a large fan base that already anticipates it, and suppose as well that the IP itself offers to, or obliges to, be exclusive for whatever platform that decides to pick it up first, and that a lead designer, a concept artist, and a programmer also come with it, mostly for free. Have you ever wondered what it would be like if someone actually put their all into one project for their whole life, and then presented it to someone who could make it happen? Well, I have. I certainly have. And forgive my stupid arrogance, but I think it's a pretty good pitch. So to answer the question, what is there left to hope for? Well, I think it's time we had an answer to that. Renaissance. Now I've said all I needed to say for now, and I apologize to anyone watching for not going into detail just yet on my actual content, and for the terrible, terrible format that I've made this presentation with. I'm not an editor, and not particularly looking forward to learning how to use the software in light of everything else I have to do on my own already. I'm also still very frightened, despite my confidence, of what might happen if I do release my content prematurely. I don't think I have to tell anyone how often content is ripped off in the genre. At any rate, the main purpose of this video is that I might simply hear my own words, wherever I am, to constantly remind myself of my duty and to do it. And in the month of January, I post my words, so to better mentally commit myself as a kind of resolution for the new year, I suppose, instead of holding off until later time and time again. Now, for you, Josh. Remember the principles. You can do it. And to my hardcores listening, hang in there.